Tonight, Bruce Jenner's story shedding light on transgender rights. But the question is, will Americans support that issue like they've supported gay rights? And if they do, will that cause even more problems for Republicans who are fighting against the tide? Then, as people pick apart the allegations in the new book about foreign donations to the Clinton Foundation, many are wondering whether this one will stick or if it's just part of another partisan attack. Also, President Obama introduced his angry alter ego at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It was all for laughs, but didn't provide a whole lot of insight into how the president's really feeling. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We're going to get to that, also some political headlines coming out of New York as well. But we begin tonight with LGBT rights. Now, this a huge issue, of course, after Bruce Jenner's interview with Diane Sawyer on Friday night, and the Supreme Court also hearing arguments about gay marriage tomorrow. Gay marriage is also a huge issue for Republicans on the campaign trail. And listen to what Ted Cruz had to say at the Iowa Faith and Freedom Summit just this weekend.
What a sad statement that today's modern Democratic Party has become so radicalized in their devotion to mandatory gay marriage in all 50 states that there is no longer any room for religious liberty.
Now, pretty much every major GOP candidate has some version of how and why they do not support gay marriage. They say they won't support it, but they go to a gay wedding. They say they don't believe in discrimination, but marriage solely between a man and a woman, no ifs, ands, or buts. Now, they don't seem concerned that the majority of people in every poll that you'll see here support gay marriage, and that plurality only widening seemingly by the day, if not month. The issue is getting more and more popular since the issue burst onto the scene several years ago. But the transgender issue, that's still new. It's not going to last long in the wake of the Bruce Jenner interview. And he told Diane Sawyer, as millions of Americans saw on Friday night, he would get involved politically to even help the cause.
You're going to go to Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and ask them to help champion this cause?
I would do that, yeah, in a heartbeat. Why not? No, and I think they'd be very receptive to it.
I don't know about that. Let's get to our panel right now. Jeannie Zaino, professor of political science at Iona College and professor of campaign management at NYU. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author, and Andrew Whitman, our senior political correspondent. I'll get to that. I got to admit, I didn't think, I'd find the Bruce Jenner interview. I thought it was just basically Kardashian stuff, but it was compelling, and we'll get into that in a second. But you can just see the contortions Republicans are going through on this issue. Ted Cruz saying, you know what, we just heard what he had to say, but then he'd say, I wouldn't be upset if my daughter was a lesbian, but he doesn't want them to be able to get married. Then you'll see others, I go to a wedding, but I just don't believe in them or not. Can they, if they keep this up next year, is this one of those issues that they're going to have a really hard time explaining to that 5–10% of Americans that can go either way next November?
Yeah, they're going to absolutely have a hard time. And here's why. Part of what they're trying to set up to run against Hillary Clinton is a, past versus forward-looking. And if you do that, then you cannot claim to be anti-gay marriage and all of these issues, because if you look at the polls, whether it is Republicans or whether it is evangelicals, the majority of young people in those polls are in favor of gay marriage and gay rights. And so they have a problem. So if you look at somebody like Marco Rubio, who is trying to run this, new generation campaign, it's going to be very difficult to make that case if you are backwards looking on an issue like this. That said, of course, they're caught because they're running in the Iowa caucus, and then, New Hampshire's a little bit different, but you go to South Carolina, and they're going to run into polls which show that the caucus goers are absolutely against some of these issues. So they have absolutely a conundrum to deal with when they run in those caucuses and those primaries.
That's why you're getting a lot of big toe dipping from the candidates at this point. Just enough to be able to say in a general election, no, I support gay rights, and same-sex weddings, it's up to individual states, but at the same time, I'm giving you just enough hint that I'm anti-gay marriage and that I'm against gay rights, so that my base in Iowa, my base in New Hampshire, my base in South Carolina will still come out and vote for me. They're trying to have it all right now.
The counter's against them, though, Dom, because to my sense, as Jeannie just said, they got to go through the gauntlet here in the primaries and the Iowas and the South Carolinas of the world, especially with the Republicans that are going to vote in primaries. They don't want to hear about gay marriage. But if you flip on the issue next year, it just comes, I think, it just seems so transparently opportunistic, you know, and people don't like that. They're in a box here.
I agree with the points because they're very valid points that have been made about the toe dipping and the trouble that they're in. And let's keep in mind Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, all conservative, very conservative, playing to the right of their base. And in all of these caucuses and primaries, the issue of gay marriage is not on the top of the list, and certainly the issue of transgenders is something that they don't even know how to begin to deal with. That is the voters in these states. And so the Republicans find themselves in a very tough situation.
And if it is on their list, it's in the primary, it's adamantly against gay marriage, it's adamantly against extending gay rights. That's where the base of the conservative movement would be for these issues. Those are the voters who might actually get driven to cast their ballot based on this issue. Let's be honest, if you're pro-gay rights, odds are you're not going to vote Republican in this presidential election anyway. So there's not a lot to gain right now by reaching across the aisle yet to the other side of this issue. As you move towards the general election, you'll want to soften your positions and you'll want to say, look, no, I'm open to the whole thing, and hope that that's not the primary indicator, the primary motivator that those voters have when they go to the polls.
Well, let's transition to transgender issues, because what surprised me, Jeannie, was the comments that I didn't hear after the Friday night interview. I didn't hear a lot of off-color jokes about it. I didn't hear, politicians saying something stupid, which they usually do. There'll be somebody out there. What was your takeaway from hearing it? I got to admit, he had more of a. I was really taken by what he said, more than I thought I was going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's not forget, he came out as a conservative and a Republican during that interview, which has surprised more people than the fact that he is transitioning to be a female, because we knew that was coming. We did not know he was a Republican. And I think that, Anthony Weiner had an interesting tweet during this entire broadcast, which was that all the presidential candidates are trying to figure out how they're going to respond to this. And I think that's absolutely true.
Where's America on this?
I don't think we quite know yet. I think people are very accepting of the fact that people should be treated equally. And so you look at the case that's coming before the Supreme Court. If you had to be a guessing person, Anthony Kennedy has written every pro-gay rights case decision in the last several years. If he is the swing vote, it's going to be in their favor. And so, you're hard-pressed to imagine they're going to go in another direction. And where does that leave the Republican Party as they go to these primaries and caucuses?
And that's obviously on the gay marriage issue that Jeannie's talking about. The Supreme Court's going to start taking up tomorrow. But, Andrew, there's a lot of issues when we talk about transgender, from restrooms to use, which prisons to send this population to we can go down the list. But the biggest macro one is, we're talking earlier today, 30 some odd states in this country, you can legally discriminate against a transgender person without any fear of reprisals.
Yeah, there's no rights for transgender people in 30 some odd states in the country. You can be fired for coming out as transgendered if you try to express your rights and want privacy in a bathroom, or say, hey, I'm transgender and I'm proud of it. You can be fired from your job in those 30 some odd states. So I think that's going to be the first big push, is for just equal rights.
And I think that's going to be a campaign question. And I think you're absolutely right. Candidates haven't figured out how they have to address this. I'm not sure they really thought they were going to have to, but this is part of the national debate right now. Dominic, I don't know. It's going to be interesting what Hillary Clinton says. I think the safest way to go about this is to say, I don't think you should legally be able to discriminate against a transgender person. And then Republicans have to explain why they think it's all right to discriminate. Right?
No doubt about it, Richard. If you're Hillary Clinton, you first of all, the 61% of Americans that support making gay relationships, that support gay marriage, you've got to piggyback on that issue in terms of, you can't just support gay marriage and then be against transgender people. It's a all-in-one package. And so if you're Hillary Clinton, she also has to walk a fine line, because a majority of Americans support gay marriage, but there's also a sizable audience that, when it comes to transgender issues, we don't know how they're going to feel about that.
And let's not forget that Hillary Clinton was on the fence in terms of gay marriage itself not that long ago. And then there was the famous NPR interview not that long ago in which she had to admit that she had changed her views. So this is an iffy issue for even the Democrats.
Do you think Bruce Jenner, at the end of the day, helped or hurt the cause of transgender rights?
I have to say, I think he helped it. I mean, you know, you need a spokesperson. You need somebody to come out. And, you know, I thought he did a beautiful job in the interview expressing, you know, some of his concerns, what he's gone through. He talked about the amount of suicide or the percentage of transgender people who commit suicide. It's a very compelling case to be made. And I think it's had a huge impact on how people think about this issue because it's so unexpected from an Olympian, somebody of that stature.
I'd qualify that to a certain degree. This may be the first time that some percentage of those 15, 16 million Americans who watched the interview have actually sat down and listened to a transgendered person's rationale for their transition and explaining why this to them is not a choice and that sort of thing. So I think to that extent it helps. My concern is that there's still something of a spectacle mentality to the Bruce Jenner interview. And I said this on Friday as we were talking in advance of his interview. We're not that far removed from episodes of Maury or episodes of The Jerry Springer Show, which was guess who's the real girl on the stage. And they'd have transgender people and drag queens and genetic women. So I think we're still so new into this that a lot of people are going to have trouble accepting it, and we're not anywhere near as far down the road as we are on gay rights, gay marriage,
But
gay
remember,
acceptance.
I think you're absolutely right, but remember how fast gay marriage as a subject moved. I mean, look at the president's change on this. Hillary, I mean, so many people changed because the country, once somebody goes to a gay wedding, or once you open up the paper and you read, you know, I think some people say, what was I so worried about? You know,
But
like,
Richard, but let's be honest about this. Transgender issues are almost an entirely different issue. I don't know. I support it on a personal level, personal decision. I just don't know if Americans are ready for to go that far yet.
I get it.
And
I
do
get it,
worry.
Don,
I do worry if this is a publicity stunt. I understand that he talked about his whole life, what he's gone through, and so on. But I do worry about the Kardashian connection and whether or not this is a publicity stunt.
There's also far lower rates of first-person or second-person connection to this. With gay marriage or gay rights, a lot of people came around when they had a relative or they knew somebody or they met a family or whatever the case may be. They had some sort of first or second-hand experience with gay people, and that changed their mind or opened their mind. Transgender Americans are something like 700,000 of them in the country. It's less than 1% of all Americans. It's going to take a longer time for people to have that kind of direct connection.
And I think it's also going to depend on how it's couched. If it's couched as an issue of equality, Americans will get on board with it. But if it's couched as, you know, some kind of spectacle, as Andrew mentioned, or, you know, something other, and people have no relationship to it, I think it's going to be very hard for people to associate with it.
and the reason why I agree with you that I thought at the end he made a good ambassador for this subject is he didn't come across weak or that he was looking for sympathy from the world. He was just trying to say, here's a glimpse into my life and the struggle for the last however many decades that he's been dealing with.
But it's what he does next. It's not just the
I think
interview,
you're right.
it's what he does next.
All right, we want you to get involved in our conversation, folks. So head to Facebook and Twitter and sound off on a question. Is America ready to support transgender rights? Okay, when we come back, we're going to have more questions about the Clinton Foundation cash controversy, but the allegations in the book that brought the story to light are starting to look a little bit flimsy.